Hi everyone, Jason here from spiritualbabies.net. You've joined us for another show on the book of Esther. We are being led through this book by Rabbi Neely in Florida. Thank you for giving us your time again, Rabbi Neely.
Always a pleasure.
You guys at home will notice a little question mark pop up in the corner. You can use that or links under this to look at our previous shows. And at the end of the show, a link will come up to Rabbi Neely's channel. There are almost an infinite amount of videos on there for you to look at, and there's fresh content every week, so go over and subscribe. Okay, so Esther has arranged to have a special dinner for the king and for Haman. Haman, in the last chapter, his plans to usurp Mordecai have gone badly awry, and now I guess Haman's kind of wondering maybe what's around the corner. He hasn't had a great week.
Well, he did. It started off good. Remember, this is the second dinner.
Mm.
In a lot of the sort of animated versions of the Book of Esther, they cut out the first one because it doesn't seem relevant. But Esther has really very carefully orchestrated everything that's happened here, as has the hand, if you will, behind the scenes, to set up that first dinner where it put him at ease and also made him overreach with his whole building of the gallows and attempting to go to the king to get permission to kill Mordecai straight away, which would, of course, not be what his plan originally was. And it was really because he was there at that time, he may have earned a little bit of the animosity of the king, may have tipped his hand of his own ambitions, and definitely was in the wrong place to then begin to fall before Mordecai. So when we get to chapter 7, we can really get already a feeling that Haman is on his way down. Right? He had to be basically dragged to this dinner because he was crashing and burning after having had to lead Mordecai through the street.
Okay. So 7 verse 1. And so the king and Haman came to feast with Queen Esther. On the second day, the king again...
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Well, I mean, I do mean to interrupt, but I hope the interruption isn't considered rude. One thing that we talk about a lot throughout this entire book is feasting. But it's kind of important because it doesn't always show up in the translations to recognize that the word for feasting here has nothing to do with eating. The word is consistently lishtot, which means drink. So these are very much drinking parties, more than sitting down for, as we would have in America, a Thanksgiving meal with a giant turkey on the table. So people often ask, why is drinking so heavily associated with the Jewish celebration of the Book of Esther, our holiday of Purim? And one of the reasons is because the setting for most of the major events of the story are with drink. And that's much clearer in the Hebrew than most translations.
They're quaffing.
Quaffing, indeed. If Ahasuerus had not been a quaffer, we're not sure how that story would have all played out.
So just briefly, isn't there a tradition, a song, or a part of kind of Jewish tradition that you haven't drunk enough until you're confused between the name Mordecai and the name Haman in a particular song?
Well, that's one interpretation of one of the descriptions of how one celebrates Purim in the Talmud.
Right. Okay.
It says one should drink so much that they cannot know ad shelo yada, until they can't distinguish between blessed is Mordecai and cursed is Haman.
I see.
And one explanation, and then people, of course, commentators ask, well, what do you mean? How do you measure can't tell the difference? Like, just you can't tell the difference at all? Like when someone says, blessed is Mordecai, you go boo. And if someone says, cursed is Haman, you go yay. I mean, that's a really high level of drunkenness. And one of the explanations, as you mentioned, is that you can't sing the song anymore. Because there was a song that used those phrases. Another explanation is that you can't do the gematria, the numbers, because blessed is Mordecai and cursed is Haman happen to have the same calculation, the same number.
Oh, I see. Very good.
Which I can't do sober. So
maybe you have to be a little bit drunk.
Exactly. But yes, unfortunately, some people who are very relaxed in their observance of every other aspect of Jewish life seem to really become stringent on the issue of getting drunk when it comes to Purim. And it can occasionally really create some very bad results, as the story in the Talmud talks about.
In the Jewish Museum here in Dublin, we've actually got a little bottle upstairs in the kind of artifacts area, and it's from about 1860, and it's a little glass bottle. It's very beautiful, and the label on the front has Purim on it, and it had schnapps in it. So
Nice.
they were legitimately making merch for the holiday. If you want to get really hammered, this is the schnapps you need, and we can prove it because of a Purim on the front. If this doesn't do the job, nothing will. So basically, this is a big long. It's not a pub crawl, but it's a big long drink fest where everyone
It's a
gets
booze
around.
up, yeah.
Bacchanalian. Okay. On the second day, the king again asked Esther at the wine feast, "What is your wish, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. What is your request? Even to half of the kingdom it shall be fulfilled." And Queen Esther replied, "If your majesty will do me the favor, if it pleases your majesty, let my life be guaranteed me as my wish, and my people as my request." So is that her basically, at that point, stating that I want the choice between life and death of my people and me to be my choice and not anyone else's?
Not exactly, no. The Hebrew really seems to be saying more, the only thing I want is to not die.
Oh, okay.
Right? And I'd like my people not to die. That is my request.
All right.
Just give me my life, which is sort of an idiom to mean, don't let me be killed. I'm not asking for anything more than just my continued existence.
So he doesn't actually have to do anything, because as far as he's concerned at that point, that was kind of what was going to happen anyway.
Well, I mean, that's obviously the hammer that she's dropping here, where she's going to explain that even though he's not aware of it, she has, as well as her people, been condemned to death. And what she's basically asking for is that be rescinded, which, as we'll see when we get into the rest of the story, it's not quite as easy as just nullifying the decree.
"For we have been sold, my people and I, to be destroyed, massacred, and exterminated. Had we only been sold as bondmen and bondwomen, I would have kept silent, for the adversary is not worthy of the king's trouble." Oh, that's a nice little dig there. Right? It's she's saying if it's just slavery, which I guess they'd be used to, that's one thing, because the person responsible for this isn't such a big deal.
So there's two ways to read the end there. So one is as you're reading it, which is basically, I wouldn't trouble the king with something as trivial as simply having been sold as a slave, which is like understatement galore.
Yeah.
But there's a second line of it, which is she's kind of saying the adversary doesn't really have the king's interests in mind, that the adversary is actually causing damage to the king.
Ah, okay.
But if we had been sold as slaves, then the damage to the king would have been much less, and I wouldn't have complained.
Right.
Which is basically, I'm looking out for your interests, which is if this guy massacres an entire nation under your sovereignty, you're going to be at a huge economic loss. Whereas if he just sold us, then you could have made out much better. And so she's playing off of Ahasuerus's greed as well through that read. But notice throughout all of this, what's very amazing is that Esther had a choice. She could have simply said, "Save me." Right? She didn't have to, in terms of cold, hard Machiavellian reality, say, "Save my people as well." But instead, she is saying, "Save all of us." And perhaps one of the reasons why she says that if we'd only been sold, it wouldn't be such a big deal, is to justify why it's also in the king's interest to save everyone else as well as her. It's maybe a little bit easier for him to want to save her, but saving everyone else, well, that's going to take some convincing, because Ahasuerus is not just a naturally compassionate kind of guy.
Okay. Thereupon King Ahasuerus demanded of Queen Esther, "Who is he, and where is he who dared to do this?" "The adversary and the enemy," replied Esther, turning to the side, I guess, "is this evil Haman." Oh man, can you imagine? And Haman cringed in terror before the king and the queen.
All right, so it's every time we chant this, I always get chills in my spine when we're going in Purim, because it is so beautifully set up. And I also want to undo a little bit of the smoothness of translation of verse 5.
Okay.
Which is, who is he and where is he? I mean, you can translate it that, yeah, but it's kind of more like, who is he? Who is he? I mean, it's like two different ways of asking pretty much the same kind of question. It's not necessarily a location for his second half. So it's more like he's stuttering out this what, who, what, which is more shocking in the Hebrew than it comes out in that lovely English translation you read.
It reminds me of there was an SNL sketch that ran for about 6 shows about the Californians, and it always start off with Fred Armistead going, "What are you doing here?" And it just reminded me of that. Okay, that's good.
And then, of course, what's really fascinating is that in verse 6, Haman is afraid not only of the king but also the queen. That, up to this point, remember the Malka, the queen, she was nothing. Vashti was kicked out at a moment's notice. And Esther has been kind of, she found favor in the sight of everybody's eyes, and she was the girl who did what she was told, and all of that, and sweet and innocent. And Haman was, of course, totally suckered by these two invitations to these dinners. And now, all of a sudden, he's afraid not only of what the king's reaction will be, but afraid of her, because he recognizes that he has totally misjudged her. He has totally underestimated her.
Okay. The king, in his fury, left the wine feast for the palace garden, while Haman remained to plead with Queen Esther for his life. And he saw that the king had resolved to destroy him. So that's kind of an interesting thing. You might wonder why the king didn't turn to Haman and say, "Is this true?" or "Why did you do this?" But he doesn't. He gets up and goes. And maybe because as we've kind of seen through the story, he's used to having to look for someone else's help or opinion. And
precisely. And who did he normally turn to?
Yeah, Haman.
Exactly. And now there's no Haman there because Haman is the problem. At least that's what his wife is saying. And so he doesn't know what to do. And so he steps away because he's just in this confusion. And that leaves Haman begging the queen.
When the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet room, Haman was lying prostrate on the couch on which Esther reclined. "Does he mean," cried the king, "to ravish the queen?" Oh, sorry. "Does he mean," cried the king, "to ravish the queen in my own palace?" No sooner did these words leave the king's lips than Haman's face was covered. So I know that the lying prostrate figure, that's kind of where the term worship comes from.
So again, Hebrew,
right.
Not the word you're thinking of.
Oh, okay. Okay, good.
So right. Hebrew here is the word nofel, which gets its own commentary. So if you wanted to be a pedant and translate the Hebrew in a hyper-literal fashion, which of course the Midrash wants to, it says, and Haman was falling, or is falling. It's a continuing action, or as a faller, you could also say, depending upon how you wanted to translate it. And so the Midrash says, why the weird conjugation here? And they say that's because an angel pushed him.
Okay. That
as he's sort of coming over to the couch to beg, he trips and falls across Esther, who's in one of those sort of Roman-style reclining lounge sofas. And now that he's fallen upon her, right as the king is coming back in, it looks like he is attacking her. And that is sealing the deal as far as Ahasuerus goes.
Okay. Then Chavona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, "What is more, a stake..." Oh, they really threw him under a bus. A stake is standing at Haman's house, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, the man whose words saved the king. Impale him on it, the king ordered. So they impaled Haman on the stake, which he had put up for Mordecai, and the king's fury abated. And right, so that's the end of that chapter for today, anyway.
All right. So why is Harvona doing this? I mean, so one thing is that everybody knew that Haman had gotten too big for his britches, right? We as the reader know that because Haman, when he was asked what the king should do to honor someone, immediately thought he was talking about himself, and immediately thought, dress him like the king, which is really, a Freudian slip, if you want to put it that way. So they were all very happy to get rid of Haman. And this also was necessary because the king was very fickle. Remember, after he got rid of Vashti, he regretted it. So you got to sort of strike while the iron is hot. And similarly, when he had been saved by Mordecai, he didn't reward him immediately. So if he didn't do something right away, he forgot about it. He had a really lousy short-term memory. So they are basically saying, we got to make sure that Haman's dead before the king sobers up or stops being angry. And indeed, by the end of this chapter, the king's already not so angry. Now, whether or not that means he wasn't as angry anymore because he had taken out the punishment, got it out of his system, or whether he wasn't angry so much anymore because he just wasn't the kind of person to stay angry, is a little unclear. But in the end, Haman's dead.
And it wouldn't have hurt Harvona at all to maybe jump into a supportive role to the king, given that the king's second in command is about to cause a job vacancy.
Exactly. One thing that's also very interesting to notice here is that up until the end of chapter 7, I mean, it actually happens in chapter 8, but all the way through chapter 7, Esther doesn't reveal who Mordecai is. And she doesn't reveal, all the details of what's going on. So she could have said, you have to save me because I'm related to Mordecai and he's so good to you, and that's why you shouldn't hurt the Jews and all of that. She doesn't. She plays it straight from herself to Haman, to the king. And that seems to have been the right play. Because the king, Ahasuerus, he had to be basically manipulated into doing the right thing. So there's no guarantee if she had just laid things out on the line that he would have made the right choice. So she had to orchestrate him to be in a position alone, isolated, where he would be forced to do what was right.
It feels as if he kind of fell into paranoia very easily, and maybe her saying, he's my uncle, may have felt that he was being a bit manipulated. In this way, I guess Mordecai, at least at this point, he's still holding his own under his own action. And
right.
There's a separation that makes their relationship still kind of healthy and not something the king has to worry about. Now,
chapter 8, she is going to introduce Mordecai and explaining the relationship. But up to this point, when all of the major things were done, she didn't rely on that.
Okay. All right, good. All right. Chapter 8 will be next time. And you guys, stick around. There's going to be some windows pop up at the end of the video. You can go over to Rabbi Neely's channel and watch all his new stuff. And there'll also be a link in the description. Thank you very much for watching. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, hit the subscribe button and the little bell next door. Make sure that you get an email alert every time a new video comes up. Thank you very much, Rabbi, for giving us your time.
My pleasure as always.
And we'll see you all again very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.